Hello and welcome back to the next part of the Antonov Colt project. And last episode we dealt with the middle and rear cabin, and today we're going to deal with the cockpit. So the first job was to make sure that the Mohawk resin ejection seats from Ares are going to fit, and they don't, so we need to do a little bit of modification, but fairly straightforward, just the side consoles needed removing. And test fitting is the order of the day, and as you can see they fit fine. This is the interseat console where the throttles and stuff are going to be. That needed a little bit of modification, so some of the raised detail was removed, some holes drilled out for more levers, and basically we can get ready for some detailing. I had quite a lot of scrap photo etch, which I used all over the place actually, but here I kind of went to town, and it just dresses up the side console. Unfortunately, not much of this is actually going to be seen. The canopy is a nice big greenhouse and there's lots of light in there, but it is kind of tucked away right down at the bottom, and there's so much detail in there, it's really very busy, so it kind of gets lost, but it just adds to the overall sort of busyness of the whole thing. And as you can see here, there's not a lot of wasted space. Bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and that's a bit of a theme of this episode, is jigsaw puzzles. It fits neatly into the onto the cockpit floor, and you see the rudder pedals are in there. A bit of a random angle, they kept on moving around. But this is just test fitting the instrument panel. Now, you'll see what I'm going to do with the instrument panel in a minute, and initially I thought, well, I need to sand off all that detail, but actually it was much easier just to flip it round. And that worked a treat. Again, more test fitting, really important. You can see moving the rudder pedals around, that they kept on moving. It was a right pain, to be honest, but I'm rushing a bit. I should have just left it, let the glue to dry properly. As with the rear cabin, the fuselage structure needs to be added. And again, this pretty much isn't going to be seen, but didn't know that at the time. And if you've seen the previous episode, you'll be familiar with this particular technique. That horizontal one there is just to help support the cockpit floor, because the side consoles in the kit usually do that. This is the rear bulkhead, so sort of behind the seats. So you can see the scrap photo etch there, but I just wanted to cover up these holes, so I just glued in a bit of very thin plastic card with a bit of cement, and then that was trimmed after that. That's just going to cover up those holes so they're not going to be visible. Right, I made this kind of overhead panel from plastic card, and once it was all dry and sanded and seamed, dealt with and everything, that was just glued in over the top. And on this I'm going to mount more levers and whatnot. Just to detail up the sides as well, add a bit of structure, a bit of interest. These scrap bits of photo etch were put on. No idea where they're from. And I don't normally have a spares box, but I sometimes keep a few bits, and it was an absolute lifesaver on this project. Found this thing, bit of leftover resin. I think it's from a 48B17 True Detail set. No idea what it is, but it looked busy enough. Some kind of lever thing. And kind of thing is also a bit of a theme. There's lots of things on this model. No idea what they all do. I'm sure the blokes who built the real thing know exactly what it's all for. And then a bit of drillage and a bit of wireage for some leverage. Just goes in the holes. And to make the sort of blob on the end, this is just super glue. And just touch it in. Wait a few seconds, and if necessary you can go in and build it up. So this is going to be a multi-engine aeroplane, so it needs a lot more levers. Lots of holes were drilled in this interseat console, and I made lots of levers from lots of wire. Exactly the same technique, just the wire poked in the holes, and blobs of super glue for the actual handle bit itself. And just fiddling around with the tweezers, just making sure they all line up. They're all kind of fairly straight. And then here we go in with the blobs of super glue for the actual sort of hand grip thing. There's that word again, thing. Okay, jumping on a little bit here. So more hairspray technique. This is the same as I did in the rear cabin, but I thought rather than using steel, I'll use aluminium. I don't think this would have been replaced by the people who engineered this aeroplane. They just gave it a quick blast of primer. So my theory is it would have chipped back to the aluminium quite readily, and this is where I'd wished I'd not actually glued in the rudder pedals. But adapt and overcome. Now, lots of masking and spraying now. All these boxes are black, and I just find it much easier just to mask and spray. I think you get a much nicer finish. That's MRP, that's why it's shiny. And then a couple of bits of plastic card to accept some consoles and things. That was painted grey, more on the other side. And the interseat console was painted black as well. Lots of masking again. Right, this is the Red Fox Studios set for the B1B, and this is what I'm going to make up all the instrument panels with, and you can see how beautiful that detail is. Absolutely phenomenal. Now this is different to the other kind of sets like this you get. This isn't decal, this is 3D printed on resin, and it's very brittle. And I needed to chop it up because obviously B1B has a different instrument panel to the Antonov, funny old thing. So using a very, very fine razor saw and being extremely careful, I managed to separate all these little bits. It took actually quite a long time, but it was definitely worth it, as you'll see in a minute. I did lose a few bits. It did break and shatter in a few areas, but the vast majority of it I managed to get it off fine, no trouble. So lots of different tools required, not only the saw but the scalpel and the sanding sticks, just to clean up all these little bits, and you end up like this with lots of pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Taking this big thing here, I thought that's got the roof panel written all over it, so that was fairly straightforward. and using a bit of the Ammo Ultra Glue, which is like a acrylic resin. It's water based, it dries rock hard, and it's the perfect stuff to glue this stuff on. Gives you a little bit more working time. Now it's important on this one, on the main instrument panel, to actually put it in situ, because originally I started the jigsaw puzzle and I didn't realise that actually there's quite a large area there in the middle at the bottom which is covered up by the interseat console. So I had to start again, and it was much easier doing it in situ rather than just doing it separately at the beginning. And as you can see, it is just a bit of a jigsaw, just taking these little bits, seeing what fits, moving things around and trying to fill up as much of the space as possible using as many of the parts as I can. Some of the parts were already curved, which was quite handy, and I just went round just taking all these different consoles and rectangles and squares and different shapes and just trying to fill up all the gaps as efficiently as possible. Obviously I couldn't fill up all the gaps, so I did end up using some airscale data placards, some of the decals, and using that to busy it up even more with some of those, like I say, some of those data placards. And just using the tips of the tweezers to just remove any excess glue. And there we go, pretty much complete, just a few decals to go, and I think you'll agree that looks amazing. As well as all the way down the back cabin in certain areas, they were used on the side consoles as well, and there's some on the other side. Okay, time to paint some knobs now. This is just Ammo acrylic. Much easier to undercoat in white if you're going to do red and yellow and things like that. And to bring out some of that photo etch detail, it had a bit of a dry brush. Now this is the Ammo of MIG dry brush paints, which if you haven't used them, I can't recommend them highly enough. They are brilliant. Who'd have thought someone could invent an acrylic dry brush paint? But it works brilliantly. Okay, the focal point of any cockpit is the seat, and these are really highly detailed, and I had some funky colours in mind for this. But after priming, and as you can see there, I've added a few little decals here and there just to busy things up. It was time to get the acrylics out. Now these are all pretty much Ammo acrylics, thinned with water, and the point of this is just to do lots of thin glazes really and build up the effect. It's rather like figure painting. Now I'm useless at painting figures, I don't mind admitting. I really would love to be able to paint figures really nicely, but I to be honest, I can't be bothered with the time. I'm just too impatient and I'll get too frustrated. But essentially what I'm doing here is actually quite good practice, so I really ought to give it a go. It's using lighter and then darker thin washes really, so it's somewhere between a kind of wash and the actual opaque paint, thinned with water, and just slowly building up obviously the darker tones in the recesses and nooks and crannies, and the lighter tones on the raised detail. and going in with lighter tones. Now, I do find that lightening up green, if you use white, it just looks really sort of too faded and too washed out. Yellow, on the other hand, keeps the green nice and vibrant. So I tend to use yellow when lightening up the green, and it works quite well, as you'll see. Not forgetting the side bits, that's easily missed. And you can see how that thin lighter colour just picks out that raised bits. If you end up with too harsh contrast between two different areas, then what you can do is just take some thin base colour and just use that as a filter over the top, and that will also help to blend things in. And it's just a question of playing with the effects, going backwards and forwards, redoing things until you get the effect that you're happy with. Now this toad, it's almost yellow, actually. So you can go, you know, really quite far up the colour wheel, as it were. If you're doing a cockpit where the seat is going to be in quite a dark recess, then it might be worth just exaggerating all these effects. It might look a bit silly kind of to the naked eye, but when you put it in the cockpit, it kind of blends in quite nicely. So I didn't have to do that on this seat because it's a bit of a greenhouse, and they are very prominent and lots of light gets in there. So not too much contrast really, and I'm just sort of playing with the effects, and I'll just keep going until I'm happy. Now, I could have cut this right down, but I just thought it was worthwhile leaving it all in. So well done if you've made it this far all the way through. If you've forward winded this bit, I don't blame you, frankly. But yeah, as I said, I think it was useful for some people just to show the whole process, every layer. And in just a second, we're going to do the parachute headbox bit. Now, yes, these are ejection seats. I thought about doing a like overhead panel that could be jettisonable or MDC or something like that, but I just thought it's easier actually just to pretend they're kind of inert. Perhaps they were useful and serviceable at the beginning, but no longer. And I thought orange would be nice and very colourful. It's going to be a very colourful model, so why not take that forward into the cockpit? So I just mixed up an orange with, funny old thing, red and yellow, and added more yellow, so it's a lighter orange for the highlights, and a more of a reddy tone, as you'll see in a sec, for the lowlights. And exactly the same technique, although a lot easier, because clearly there's not that many folds, but there's still, you know, creases and bits that would catch the light. Using acrylics, it can be quite easy to get tide marks. They do dry very quickly, but if you just got a little bit of acrylic thinner on hand, you can use that to blend things back in. If you're not brave enough to use the neat thinner, then obviously thin it with a little bit of water. But Yeah, that acrylic thinner stuff, it's not that aggressive actually, so you should be fine if you just want to do a little bit of blendage. If you do, like I say, get those tide marks. And just trying to pick out the edges there, because again, obviously that's going to catch the light. And again, apologies if you're finding this a little bit tedious, but as I just said earlier, I just thought it was worthwhile just to do the whole process almost in real time. I have, believe it or not, cut this down. But I just, as I said, I just thought it's important or useful rather than important just to go into a little bit of depth on this bit. Right, phew, we're getting there. Well done for hanging in. Right, the low lights now. So with orange, I thought rather than add a bit of sort of brown or that kind of thing, again, with using the yellow over the green, I thought using the red gives a much better effective depth and it keeps that orange character. So the straps have been painted a light grey, and now I'm just going in with a little bit of silver, touching in all the little metal buckles and things. Obviously there's quite a lot on this kind of seat. So it's almost a kind of wet dry brush, if you can imagine that. So it's not actual dry brushing, but just using a little bit of paint. And now for the fun stuff. Time to make that detail pop with a wash. So Ammo PLW washes, they're really good for this. Just touching it in. And it may look a little bit stark there, but it will, as it dries, becomes a lot more subtle and you get a really nice effect. And once this is dry, we'll just go in with a clean brush and start touching things in. That's the other side there. Just to highlight the straps on the top, I just used Trap Wash, which is quite a deep red-brown tone. And again, that sort of complements the orange quite nicely and really picks out that sort of strap detail around that parachute head box. And then that's just blended away when dry, just with a clean brush. And finally, there are the two finished seats, really quite colourful, I think you'll agree. Time to bring everything together now. So for extra strength, I drilled and pinned the seats. They were just glued in with super glue. You see the control columns are in now as well. Bulkhead at the back, that can be glued on. and you saw all the detailing on the other side on the previous episode. Everything was dry fitted as I went along. That's really important. Make sure everything fits. So gluing it up was not too stressful actually. So really that is the front cockpit complete, but I thought I'd just show the construction of the entire interior just to show you how it all went together. This is the air conditioning unit ducting thing. That was just some plastic rod which was shaped with a flame and just bent to shape, painted up and weathered. The floor that you saw last time, and that just slots in at the bottom. And we'll just use a little bit of cement just to glue that in place. That aircon pipe where it comes into the aeroplane from the aircon unit, which is on the outside, I just drilled a hole through, so that will fit in to the left-hand fuselage half. The middle bulkhead has gone on. The top of the roof I drilled and pinned just for a bit of extra strength. You see the gunner's seat there for the turret, and then there's a little bit of a brass pin at the back that goes through a hole, and then the tabs just slot in. Now this is actually quite flexible, as you can imagine. It's a little bit like how a helicopter kit is made up. So what I did is I just put that into the fuselage half to let it dry. This is a bit of rubber tubing, and that goes onto that sort of bottle thing, and I did have a little sticky out pin so it slots into the roof. And there you can see how busy it looks in the fuselage half. Loads going on. And luckily it is all visible in the finished model. You just need to look. And now the moment of truth. Is it all going to fit? So I've got obviously loads of extra detail, extra bulkheads going on. This is nerve-wracking, but I wasn't too worried because I've been dry fitting all the way through. It will go. There we go. It just slides in quite nicely. Popped out the top. A little bit of jiggery. And there we go. And the fit is actually really very nice, which is somewhat of a relief. There we go. It's all ready for glue. And that's it for part 3B. Well done for sitting through all that painting of the seats. But in the next episode, I play with some highly detailed engine. Have a go at some of the rust effects on the bulkheads. Do a bit of plumbing and wiring. And not content with inline engines, have a go at a radial as well. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one for the engines and all the greeblies. Thank you, bye-bye.